All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh had the end of the year press conference yesterday, and after watching it, by the way, it was only 20 minutes, but after watching it, I wanted to really dive in and talk about a couple key points that I pulled away. So I think the first thing that was clear, like right off the bat, it really does seem like Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas are on the same team. They're on the same wavelength, if you will. It does not seem like there's any sort of GM versus head coach battle, any sort of ill will or anything like that, amongst each other. We've seen that actually with the Jets before in the past with guys like Rex Ryan and John Idzik, where the two parties just did not get along. They're not on the same page. How can you have a successful football team? How do you expect to make consistent playoff runs and eventually win a Super Bowl if the coaching staff in the front office aren't seeing eye to eye? They're not working in unison. So I think that's really important. Now, obviously, we're only 1 year into this thing, coming off of a 4-win season, and Joe Douglas has been here longer than Saleh, but I gotta say, as far as a working relationship is concerned, I feel really good about where the front office and the coaching staff are standing. The second takeaway is that it doesn't really seem like there's going to be a playoff mandate put in place for this Jets team next season. Now, from a personal standpoint, I've never really been the biggest fan of quotas in the middle of a regular season. It's hard for me to back. Now, I'm not completely against it because I do feel like it is necessary with certain teams. Chicago is a perfect example. Matt Nagy, they have the talent, but it seems like they're either staying stagnant or they're going down, right? They're going backwards. And, eventually, when you're looking at these teams with tons of talent, they have a coaching staff in place. They've been there for, a handful of years. They've maybe been to the playoffs before. Eventually, you want to see this Bears team in the playoffs, not because you're a fan of the team. I mean, of course, that's an aspect of it, but because this team, from an objective standpoint, has the talent to be in the playoffs. So anything short is a disappointment. Another example, the Minnesota Vikings with Mike Zimmer. You had to make the move. It was time for Zimmer to go. A not so good example was Brian Flores in Miami. I'm not saying that's the exact reason why he got fired or anything like that. We don't really have those details as of right now. Maybe they'll come out in the future. But I looked at Brian Flores as a guy who was truly building a good culture with the Miami Dolphins. Yeah, they weren't making those deep playoff runs. They weren't getting to the AFC Championship. There were a couple, problems here and there, but that firing to me was unwarranted. So circling back to the Jets here, it doesn't really feel like there's going to be that, hey, we better make the playoffs or we're cleaning house or we're getting rid of Saleh. It doesn't really have that vibe, okay? And I think that's the right move because of where we're at right now. I will say this, we better see improvement. 4 wins is not good enough, and Joe Douglas addressed it. Now, the third takeaway was the fact that Joe Douglas acknowledged the 2020 draft class and pretty much said, I'm summarizing here, as a group, they aren't really where they should be, okay? But at the same time, they're not going to give up on those players, okay? They're not just going to throw them to the wolves. And I think it was important for Joe Douglas to acknowledge, and it sounds a little bad, but acknowledge the shortcomings of that class. Now, look, was it an atrocious class? No. Bryce Hall was drafted in 2020. Braden Mann was drafted in 2020. Mekhi Becton. Obviously, the jury is still out on Becton's long-term health moving forward. But I love Becton. He's my second favorite player on the Jets offense, right behind George Fant. So there were a couple of solid picks made by this Jets team in 2020, but the grand majority, what's happening with LaMichael Pirine, what's happening with Denzel Mims' future moving forward. Jabari Zuniga, is he going to be a part of the team moving forward? James Morgan has already been let go from the team. He was a 4th-round pick. And that pick was obviously questionable to begin with because we had a young quarterback currently at the time on the roster in Sam Darnold. Just a strange pick. So I did think it was important for JD again to just acknowledge the 2020 class, because at the end of the day, if you want to be a team that builds through the draft, you actually have to execute in that department. Of course, it's not a perfect science. You're never going to nail every single draft pick, but at the same time, you can't have years, right? Like a full year's draft class where the majority of the guys just have no part of the team moving forward. So definitely interesting for sure. So the fourth takeaway for me was actually just a quote by Joe Douglas, and I actually have it jotted down here. We're always going to value the line of scrimmage here. Okay, that was the quote. And it insinuates that we're not done building these trenches. offensive line, defensive line. We have to get better. I mean, especially on defense. I mean, not only are we just the 32nd ranked defense in the NFL, the worst defense in the league, but I mean, man, we couldn't get after passers. We couldn't stop the run. It was hard to watch. It was hard to watch. And this defensive scheme is based all around getting after the quarterback with your 4 down linemen. I mean, it's not a 3-4 where you're sending exotic blitzes all the time. You know, you're sending multiple linebackers every which way. You're sending guys up the middle, left and right, and that's how you're depending on pressure. No, in this system, I mean, it's a zone-based system, okay? So you have to have your 4 down linemen get in the backfield, okay? Think of a guy like Nick Bosa. Offensively, we have pieces. You know, Elijah Vera Tucker, George Fant, again, one of my favorite players he actually, you know what? He is my favorite player on this Jets offense. He's just my type of guy. Keeps his head down, just goes to work, underrated, doesn't get enough credit. I love George Fant. Morgan Moses on that 1-year contract. Mekhi Becton hopefully should be coming back from that injury pretty, you know, I'm hoping it's smooth sailing and there's no setbacks or anything crazy, but it's not a perfect line, okay? And we saw that this season. At times it was really good, right? Specifically in run blocking and whatnot, but it wasn't perfect. It wasn't a top 5 O-line. It wasn't it wasn't an elite bunch, is basically what I'm getting at here. So will the Jets address this position maybe through the draft, okay? Because there's a couple guys towards the top end of the draft, like Ekem, NC State, Neal, Alabama, Linderbaum, Iowa. Okay, there's going to be some talent there that would come in and benefit this Jets team. Or maybe are we thinking free agency? Should we extend a guy like Morgan Moses? You know, and then of course there's some other, you know, 1-year contracts that you would assume are going to be, you know, playing elsewhere next season, like Dan Feeney, Greg Van Roten, guys like that. But Connor McGovern's one of the highest paid centers in the league. Yeah, and that's a really interesting player there. But bottom line, Joe Douglas and this Jets organization value the trenches, and you can tell that's the number one priority of team building in JD's mind, in his eyes. You know, you have to build a stout offensive line, and you have to be aggressive. You have to get production from the defensive line, okay, based off of schematics. And also, you know, looking at Joe Douglas, where was he before the Jets? He was in Philly. Why did the Eagles offense have so much success, not only just in the playoff run, but throughout the majority of Joe Douglas's time there? It was because of the offensive line. That offensive line was fantastic for the Eagles. So, man, it's going to be a fun offseason. Now, the fifth and final takeaway for me was the fact that when draft assets were brought up, overall draft capital, and potentially using that for a trade for a proven veteran player, Joe Douglas did not seem to shoot it down or anything like that. It was a little coach speaky, if that makes sense. Just, you know, let me try to cover every bases, not give a super direct answer. But he also had a quote in there that I thought was interesting. If an opportunity presents itself, we will be aggressive. You know, I think if we look at that answer and we also look at where the Jets are this season, you know, coming off of a 4-win year, we know we have to get better. Okay, I mean, that's a fact. And there's multiple positions of need. Safety, wide receiver. Again, we talked about O-line and D-line, running back. There's a lot of positions that this team could use here. So with recent rumors flying around about Calvin Ridley, with multiple guys in the trade block at numerous positions, could Joe Douglas dish out one of these second-round picks, a third-round pick, you know, multiple mid-rounds, like a fourth and a fifth, for a proven veteran player? It honestly did not seem like that it was out of the question. It almost seemed like he was leaning that way. Like he's almost more open to dealing picks this offseason than in years prior. So, and I will say, I felt like in years prior, it's all about building the young core, and I still believe it is about building the young core, but it was always, let's part ways with players to accumulate more draft capital, where this offseason it's like, yeah, we have all this extra draft capital, now we have more flexibility, we have a longer leash to go out and get that veteran wide receiver, go out and get that veteran pass rusher. We now have the ability to do that, or, you know, we have a better chance of doing that than maybe another team that just has the normal slate of draft picks. So those are my 5 takeaways. I thought it was a really interesting presser. Again, it was only 20 minutes long. I was hoping for a little bit longer, but all in all, I gotta say I was impressed. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you guys happen to check it out, what were some of your takeaways? And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. And as always, go Jets.